First up, thanks for joining us, everybody, today. As you all know me well enough to know that I like to do things a little bit differently. So I've got some questions for you that I would love to step through and get your perspective on, hopefully thought-provoking for you and your responses for the audience. First, though, by way of introductions, I'm going to let you do a self-introduction. But as part of your self-introduction, I want you to assume that you've just been elected as president of the cybersecurity community and give us your 2-minute State of the Union address. So Bryson, let's go ahead and start with you.
My fellow Americans and my fellow American computers and computers throughout the world, thank you so much for electing me president of cybersecurity. The State of the Union, I'd like to say, has never been stronger, but there's a reason you elected me, because we need help. So I think we are still struggling with the fact that while computer security is now more of a mainstream conversation, I still don't think accurate understanding of risk and the appropriate prioritization and investment back into it across all sectors. I think this is a problem in government. I think this is a problem in private industry. It continues to still prevail. The reality is that the relationship of cybersecurity to mission and business operations is an inviolate relative perspective. The purpose of every business and mission, of course, is to accomplish that operation. Then you have information technology and computers to help scale that. Then you have defense to assure those. And then you have niche things like offensive security to be able to validate. As we say in the military, we sweat in peace, so we bleed less in war. And that's our ability to operationalize and understand that risk before it happens to us. And I think that we still have not done enough to move out of nerds talking echo speak to other nerds and not talking in business and mission speak.
That's great. Hey, by way of introduction, though, to let the audience know who you are for those that
I
aren't
thought I was
familiar.
just president. So I'm a former Army officer. I founded several companies. I founded a consultancy called Grim 8 years ago. Team of hackers. We've hacked everything. Spun out a product company a few years ago called Scythe. It's an adversary emulation platform. Allows you to dial up any malware with a click of your fingers. The co-founder of the ICS Village, which is a 501c3 nonprofit advocating education awareness and critical infrastructure. I'm an advisor on the Army Cyber Institute and a senior fellow at the R Street Institute in cybersecurity and emerging threats. Excellent, thank you. And a big fan of unicorns. And I'm just going to ruin the surprise and say I bought you the best unicorn hat for Christmas. I can't wait for it to arrive. Masha, you're next. I look forward to it.
Oh, great. Bryson, I love the unicorn hoodie. It makes me realize I should have dressed up better for this. Hi, everybody. I'm Masha Sadova. Currently, I am the co-founder of Elevate Security, a platform that helps quantify and influence employee risk in organizations. And throughout my career, the one question that I have constantly been focused on, obsessed with, probably care more than anybody else in the world, is how do we get employees to be a part of our defense? And how do we evolve our industry from thinking about the human element as just the weakest link into a key part of our ecosystems of finding and detecting attacks in our organizations, but also helping us thrive as a security community. So what that looks like, I come from a traditional background of actually studying computer security, had a stint, multi-year stint working with the defense sector, focusing on Russian APTs, had a chance to build and run the security engagement program at Salesforce that was really focused on all aspects of the human element, from internal employees to external customers. And today get to run an amazing startup, as I was saying, focusing on employee risk. And if I'm putting on my president hat, there's a couple of things that I want to echo what Bryson said, but today the industry still very much focuses on our capabilities, not our risk. we like to compare how many shiny toys we have to our peers, and we buy things from FOMO more than we do on based on how we need to be protecting our organizations. And what that does for us is we haven't backed up far enough to understand where our blind spots are. In the work that I do, blind spot that I see time and time again is a deep and meaningful understanding of the human element, which is why this is an area of pain for me. But it is also it doesn't just stop in that component. When we only focus on capability versus risk maturity, we make investments based on the latest trends and not in the areas where we need to be impacting our organizations the most. And it really does come back to some of the basics that we all know and would hope that we would have gotten good at, but not quite there.
Great.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Stephen. No, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay. Thanks for having me. I'm Stephen Rogers. I'm the CEO of Centripetal Networks and founder of the company. My background in network security started back in the Air Force. I was responsible for network security for a lot of Air Force platforms, DoD platforms, command centers, aircraft, including Air Force One, things of that kind. Since then, I started several companies, one which I took public, and now I'm at Centripetal. The idea of Centripetal is to merge network technology and cyber technology together and to do it in a proactive way. And we think there's too much labor in cyber, and that's probably the biggest problem. So if I was elected head of the cyber user organization, I would say too much labor intensity in what we're doing. We've got to fix that, and the way to do it is with new technology.
Augment the humans with new technology. Do we get a universal basic security income associated with that?
Maybe so, but I think that we need to extend security to all users, and that includes people, retired people in their homes who don't have an IT staff, and it has to go all the way up to the largest organizations, government organizations, who can afford to spend money on this. And so that means the solution has to work in all of those environments and provide essentially a good quality security across that spectrum.
Great. All right. So next question. So I had originally written down as a question, what unexpected challenges did organizations face and how did they manage it? But I was like, well, that's the question I've seen answered on 6 months worth of panels around COVID. So I'm going to ask the opposite of that. Mosh, I'm going to have you go first. What security initiative got put on the back burner in 2020 that's going to come back and haunt us in 2021?
Oh, you really do like the zingers without any prep, huh? It's a good question. So I'm seeing a lot of focus and a lot of fanfare on the word zero trust and everything that means. And I think people are doing that maybe because it's the right thing to do, but maybe because, again, it's the cool thing to do. I'm not seeing as much of an investment in asset. That's not even true. It's the third party risk. People are prioritizing their own perimeters without addressing third party risk and vendor risk. And why that's particularly terrifying is as we see the head of ransomware show up everywhere, you're only focusing your attention on your internal network and your internal employees, because frankly that is your top priority, and trying to make sure everyone can log in securely at home. That by not focusing on your vendor environments, your contractor environments, you're not able to lock that down. It comes in from the back door. And now that it's no longer legal to pay ransomware, that is an extra high stakes decision.
Excellent. Stephen?
What's the biggest thing? I think what we've all seen is that the scale of the problem continues to grow. So the number of attackers, the number of threat indicators, the number of vectors upon which bad things can come at you grows faster than you can grow a team to counter it. So it's scale.
Scale is going to come back to haunt us.
That's right.
Excellent. Bryson.
Yeah, I agree with Steve on that it's a scale problem. It's not only a scale on the offense side, because at the end of the day, attackers take advantage of the surface area that's available, and code only gets more code, and there are more devices. And with the advent of IoT, which is not only in residential, but is in enterprise and infrastructure, we have created an exponentially growing surface area that is beyond our ability to keep up with it at the hardware, the software, and of course, it's not like we can grow people at that same rate.
Great. Do you think that, as a kind of a follow-up to you both, do you think that the tools exist now and we just need broader adoption, or do we still need new innovation around our ability to scale to address some of these problems? Are there new technologies that are needed that are going to scale? Bryson, what do you think?
Yes. I don't think that. So first, there's no silver bullets. Security is inherently an unsolvable problem. It's a process, not some state that you achieve. And so configuration management, understanding what I have and being able to control around that. And then on top of that, understanding the systems perspective to my vulnerabilities, as well as how my users work with those vulnerabilities, whether they're known or unknown. I haven't seen any innovations that tackle that at that scale. And I don't think the market is taken IoT seriously because buyers haven't yet got there. We're so stuck with the enterprise IT problems that we have. We know it's an issue, but it's down here on the list and it's coming.
Excellent. Stephen, how about with you? You also mentioned that scale being an issue. Do you think it's a matter of scaling existing technologies, or are we ripe for a new period of innovation and new technologies?
Well, I think we've got new technologies that are available to deal with the problem, but the difficulty is it has to work for the scale of the organization. I think we all know there's about 1,500 at last count new cyber companies that have been funded by venture capitalists, and there's a lot of good ideas in that 1,500. But if you're the defender, you have to say, wait a minute, how can I even know which ones are good and which ones are not? And so we need to make a transition between these great ideas and pick the ones that are going to have the biggest impact on your organization.
Great.
So the technologies are there, but there's a gap in applying them.
In application. Got it. Just as a reminder to folks, if you post a question in the Q&A section for these panelists, I'll be watching that and we'll intersperse those with my questions. So Stephen, I'll go back to you for this response as well. What was your biggest surprise of 2020, excluding the emergence of a global pandemic? What's something else that caught you by surprise?
Well, we might have, I would say having to do with the pandemic, the biggest surprise is that the bad guys didn't sleep. Maybe they didn't get COVID, I don't know, but the amount of attacks, traffic, and the amount of workload to support customers had to stay the same. There was no change in that we could tell. We might have thought there would be some lessening, but there wasn't.
Excellent. Maybe they got the early vaccine out of Russia. Bryson, what was your surprise of 2020?
Not the amount of ransomware, but the amount that victims are paying ransomware. There have been releases that have come out. I had always just sort of assumed in my head from my anecdotal exposure that ransomware was like a 5 to low 6-digit problem. And we have seen folks paying add even more zeros to that. I had no idea. We just did an emulation on Ryuk The Ryuk campaign to date has earned $150 million.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the biggest surprise to me is how lucrative it is.
Yeah. You could live off that, I think. Masha, what was your surprise of 2020?
I have a security and a non-security answer. For my non-security one, I think I was surprised by the productivity numbers that are still coming out. It's been really fascinating with the reports around the fact that many organizations still continue to have productive workforces. Stressed, yes, but the fact that we as a nation, frankly, as a world, are able to actually do the transition, work from home, like the thing that so many of our organizations said is impossible, like this won't work, it is proven us wrong, which means this isn't going away. We, even in post-vaccine world, we're going to live in an environment where distributed workforces are the new normal, which means that we need to be much better around adapting to environments where we have such little control, right? Where the security awareness isn't just extended to the employees, but that of the kids of our employees and the grandparents and everyone else who could possibly access our equipment. And so that's been a one fascinating thing that I've been really enjoying seeing and having that flexibility. From a cybersecurity perspective, I've been disappointed around how frail some of our systems were, like how, especially as it relates to reporting or relates to admitting failure or asking for help, or how little we had the infrastructure once we left an office to say, is this phishing? Is this ransomware? How do I set up my home network? And the fact that we were not able to, we're not able to support our employees in a scalable way in this new environment, and how we were so office centric for some of these lines of communication and support.
Excellent. Yeah, I think Bob cited that statistic of, expected 50% less business travel and 30% of the people continuing to work from home. I think that has interesting impact, in a non-cyber way on just how we build out infrastructure in the US as well. And, we'll start to get a distribution out of the cities, perhaps. I know where I own some land up in Vermont that had no internet, no broadband connectivity, no cellular connectivity. They now have both. You have the ability to get decent wireless broadband, and there's a brand new cell tower, and the property values are going up by 30 to 35%, just for people to realize, like, oh, I can live in the country and mountain bike and fish and also connect to my Zoom calls and keynote conferences and whatnot. So that'd be interesting. I want to focus a little bit on the attack vector side of the equation. Bryson, you mentioned ransomware already in particular, but is there one attack vector for 2021 that you're most concerned with? If you had to pick one, obviously there are many.
Sure. So since 2021 is supposed to be not what we've seen in 2020, but what we think will change. Again, going back to, I commented earlier about that concern about IoT security. I've been giving this talk for several years showing IoT itself is not the target. It's what it connects you to. It's the jumping point. It's the entry point. It's the way that I can laterally move to things of interest. And so I give this talk, you just search my name in IoT, you'll see how I demonstrate how that's done. In fact, that's what the Russians got caught doing, was following that same technique back in August 2019. And so with the decentralized environment, with mixed assets of residential IoT without proper hygiene and segmentation from corporate assets, and then the way that that is able to go back into an environment that people think a VPN is good enough and not do any more trust segmentation, I believe that we're going to see a lot more of that put together, and with ransomware thrown into the mix.
So let me just ask a kind of follow up, and then we'll move to Stephen and Masha. For the average person, kind of what is the guide or what is the best practice? I've been in the security industry for 25 years, red teamer. I still spend dozens of hours per year configuring my home network, my home IoT devices to kind of be secure. What is the answer for the folks that don't have the expertise or the time? Like, how are we going to solve that problem, do you think?
Yeah, so I want to call out a comment that just came in from one of the folks watching, Tiffany, commenting it's on the manufacturers. And fundamentally, that is the gap that we have. Is it's not a design for security. It's a life cycle of security where it's in a residential environment. And we do not make it easy for people to update their IoT devices, right? So the latest things that are coming out to maintain that life cycle are not easy to find. So what can you do? First of all, besides patching, which of course is the silver bullet answer is always thrown out there, and if only were that easy, is segment your networks at home. So on your Wi-Fi router at home, have a network just for IoT devices, whatever your things are, whatever those are, have that be on a different network than the same thing that you have your personal computer and you have your work computers. Because I mean, that personal computer is where you're doing your taxes, and that work computer is where you're doing real world stuff. Those two should not be on the same LAN. That's probably the quick and easiest thing to do to create some separation.
Segmentation.
Yeah.
Great. So, Stephen, what's your perspective? What's the attack vector that you're most concerned with for 2021?
Well, I tend to agree with what Bison just said. If we're going to have people working from home more, less concentrated in facilities, then that means they're outside the protection. The VPN is not enough. An idea like segmenting, that's a really good idea. Somehow it has to be implemented in a way that's really, really simple. So the person who's a writer for a tech pub for a company who doesn't know about configuring and segmentation, it just works. Plug it in here, it works. So we've got to get to a level of simplicity that's far greater.
Excellent. And Masha?
Yeah, so I think all downstream effects that we're going to be worried about, like the ransomware, like increased phishing, all comes from the fact that we now have to rely on our employees to do the heavy lifting of this IT work and security work that they could rely on from a corporate standpoint. And so Bryson and Stephen already said this, but the challenge is not even the segmentation. The challenge is going to be the communication. The challenge is going to be the support. And it's going to be from an ongoing basis. Like segmentation is the first step, right? But then we have to figure out a way to democratize security solutions, which I actually think it is a very steep challenge, but it is actually the thing that probably we need as a nation. No one's really focusing on consumer security. Like if you're an employee who works for an organization, great. Like you at least have someone who's trying to give this communication out to you. But if you are a regular employee of a mom and pop shop, no one is helping you with your Wi-Fi setup or configuration. And so collectively, while this is both a pain of 2021, I also think it's one of our greatest opportunities, because when we do meet this challenge the way we need to, it doesn't just benefit corporate employees, it benefits everybody in this country, because I would like my mother to have segmented networks, and when we finally figure that out for the lowest common denominator in our organizations, we'll be able to do it for everybody else in this country too.
Excellent. I was going to be upset if you didn't say people. Do you think we need security education awareness at an even earlier stage? I know that we've been advocating for it, but why aren't we doing phishing exercises with our elementary school kids? Do you think we need to be looking at things that early in kind of the consumer life cycle?
Yeah, I think earlier is better, but so there's two parts to this, right? It's the skills that we need to be developing in our people, not even just workforce, but it's also the why. That's the biggest gap across the board for both employees in our organizations, but also for school kids. People don't understand that they are a target and they have information that is valuable. At minimum, it is their toaster that is a target, right? And that makes it enough. And most people just do not grok that concept. And so spending the time going back, even to middle school, as soon as you get online, understanding why someone would be interested in you is so much more, from a security perspective, is so much more important than telling people what they need to be looking out for, because that gives you the ability to start critically thinking about your ecosystem, and the things you touch and the technologies that you are responsible for, because we can't prepare our middle school kids and our high school kids for the attacks of the future. We don't even know what they're going to look like. But if we can teach them to critically think about what it means to have an adversarial mindset, we can also teach them to start thinking about how they would defend themselves.
Excellent. Yeah, and we saw the call out from Bryson in the chat for the Grim Toaster, which of course trolls me over the paper I wrote in 1996 called "Can You Trust Your Toaster?" With Bryson's Hood, I really feel like I'm playing a Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game. So I'm going to say, behind the door to the west is the fiercest, most disruptive adversary you can imagine for 2021. Bryson, who is it?
That's funny. We built arcade games for Choose Your Own Adventures for red team and blue team experiences. So folks that aren't technical can get exposure and learn from that. Well, 2021, I think it's going to continue to be, I think it's going to be organized crime pushing these campaigns, because it's such a way to make money. And by the way, I consider North Korea organized crime.
There you go. Cool. Masha, question from the audience. How are organizations gauging productivity performance metrics with remote workspaces? Any insight?
Yeah. For more traditional teams, like there's code check-in and code and speed of code distributions and releases, right? So that's one aspect of it. But there's been a couple of reports published by trying to remember, possibly McKinsey. I'm not totally sure, but frankly, in tracking how CEOs are thinking about their productivity, they're saying delivery is high, innovation is low. So of all the podcasts I've listened to, and I'm happy to look those up and share them after or in the chat on the side, but I think we're going to get through this 1 year of maintaining the deliverables of the things we set on track at the beginning of this year. We're going to start seeing the impact of that next year, because we do not have face-to-face time and collaboration where a lot of innovation happens. We're going to start seeing the productivity potentially dip down for net new ideas. But happy to look up the reports that I've read this from.
Excellent. Yeah, you can paste them in the group chat after the panel. Stephen, what is one non-obvious or counterintuitive observation that you can provide about cybersecurity going into 2021?
Non-obvious one. I guess we're in the business, so things might be obvious to us, not obvious to others. I can think of several. The first is the emergence of proactive use of threat intelligence. Since when you look at successful breaches, even ransomware breaches, especially ransomware breaches, you find that 99.9, maybe even higher percentage of those, somewhere there was threat intelligence on that attack in the community. It just wasn't applied. So I think it's obvious to us that over time, particularly in 2021, we're going to start to apply this threat intelligence proactively to stop these things before they even get in or even get started. So that's an important one, I think.
Excellent. Bryson, how about you? What's something non-obvious or counterintuitive that you think is important for people to understand?
Um, I think I would say it's how much people are part of your surface area. We are too fond of looking at technical controls and technical solutions and framing it limited to a technical problem. So again, the most common attack vector is email. Why is it email? Because it's not a technical hack. I just need somebody to click. I need somebody to use the software on a computer the way it was designed. And we tend to focus on hitting them and beating them over the head when it's again, anybody could fall prey to a phish. There's no sophisticated user that couldn't fall for it.
Masha?
Bryson took my line, so I have to, I have to, I have to think about something different. But what I wanted to, an observation that I am seeing and rumors I'm hearing is that the never-ending fountain of cybersecurity budgets are slowing down, and organizations are pausing the open checkbooks that cybersecurity has had for years, 7-8 years now, and asking, what's my ROI on these enormously large spends? And I think what we're going to start seeing from boards as we get into more fiscally restrained budget negotiations is a conversation of, do I really need this technology, this program, this process? And if so, why? And it is my hope, maybe I'm being optimistic here, that we don't do this based on benchmarking of what my peers are doing. It's like, well, so-and-so is doing it, so we should too. But we actually get to do this in a way that is thoughtful of looking at what are the risks we need to be tackling. And we've already talked about this. It's nothing new. It's the same risks every year. It's phishing, it's malware, it's making sure we patch the assets that we know about, right? We get those locked down, we'll be good. But I think we're going to start seeing budget spends tighten up, and because of that, there's going to be more scrutiny and where that spend's going.
Excellent. I have a question in the chat as well around when do we start training for security? Curious on the panel's thoughts on how to introduce security early on. For example, is email, which is a primary mode of communication, vice messaging, SMS, etc., the one that makes the most sense, or is there something that's a little bit more foundational that we need to be training people on earlier? Bryson, any thoughts there? And then we'll go to Masha and Stephen.
I mean, I'll repeat what I said earlier. I mean, I think we keep blaming the user. I agree that technical proficiency and awareness, particularly around information analysis, so the disinformation, misinformation problem, I think is a greater societal risk that we have there. And the earlier that we can start looking at that, I don't think we really understand the true depth of impact that social media has had on us as a society, as well as the psychological development of all of us, including, most importantly, I mean, children.
Yeah. Stephen, any thoughts? Is there something we should be thinking about by way of how to best educate users earlier on in the process that's outside of phishing exercises?
Well, I agree with what Masha said about this, that we need to start early and explain to people, or make them aware, even younger kids, how valuable their information is and why would somebody want it, and to be careful about using social media, providing that information. I also agree with Bison in the sense that we're not going to turn every user into a cyber engineer. That's not going to happen. So if that's not going to happen, then how will we protect? How will we protect everybody? And it's my view that cyber ends up being a service, just like you have a phone service, you have other services. Cyber ends up being a service where highly trained people are leveraged to provide you the protection so you don't have to be one of those people. So that's my thought about it.
Mosh, I'm going to tailor it a little bit more for you and ask you specifically to talk about the role that maybe gamification and incentives might play in that type of education process.
Yeah. So one of the biggest learnings I've had in my security career so far is that we cannot get the average employee or citizen to care about security the way that any of us on this call care about security. And doing so is a futile exercise. But what we can do is connect security to something that they already care about. Sense of recognition, accomplishment, protecting something they care about, like their organization or their families or their data, improving on their skill sets, getting feedback and a sense of mastery. They may not do it because they care about the security of a system. Like that takes a certain type of wiring and internal motivation. But what it is on us to do is help people understand how they can get better and motivate them to do so. The gamification that you were just referencing, Matt, is one way to do it. Positive incentives in the whole field of this psychology study talks about how we can have positive reinforcement for more good behaviors that we want people to see in security. And when we do that, we don't just tell people do this or else, which is frankly the way we've been trained as a security function to do. If you take this training, if you don't take this training, you'll have your systems locked out. If you don't reset your passwords, we'll lock you out. If you click on this link, you'll have to mandatorily take training. It's just a lot of bad news from us, right? Instead of flipping it around, it's like, when you do this, you have helped us defend our organizations, or you have saved your data, or motivating people to action, because we have a lot on our plates, and just having a lot of empathy for the way that we communicate in the ecosystem of how employees receive our information. Which brings me to a second point, which is we gotta bring in a lot more help outside of security. We keep talking about this being a people problem. Security people are excellent at security. And there's a lot of great experts out there in psychology and organizational change and in behavioral science. And it's about time we start bringing those people to the table, because we can't solve this problem alone. And it's a huge problem for not just a company, but as a nation. And we actually need to get down from our ivory towers and start asking for help from a lot of other people, help them understand security, but we have a lot to learn from other industries as well.
This is kind of an interesting one. I like to catch people by surprise on my panels, as you know, but this is from the audience, and they're asking, is there a campaign equivalent that we can do here with the younger generation? And the example that Jacqueline provided was cut your plastic bottle holders to save wildlife, which when I think to my kids, they go through that same thing. You get the 6-pack of beer or diet soda and they want to cut the plastic. Is there a thematic, that you can think of, and what would that be? And I realize this is not an easy answer. We could probably spend a week with a whiteboard, to come up with it, but what comes off the top of your head as a thematic that might be beneficial from a cybersecurity perspective?
Is a question to me?
Yeah, any of you. Yes. Yeah. Go
Think
ahead.
before you click.
Think before you click. Somebody in
Question
the chat
every
says,
source.
Stop, think, connect. Question every
Not
source.
what it seems.
I'd say MFA everywhere.
MFA
I like
everywhere.
that. That's a good point.
There you go.
People are always going to click. MFA everywhere.
I do think we have a challenge. This is a little bit of an aside. I think I'm a father of 3, so I've grown up, through the millennial tech generation. We have a real issue with kind of identity management. My kids want to play simple games with peers, yet they're asked for real email addresses. They're asked to confirm date of birth, and they've become experts at lying. to those services, right? But we need some solutions that don't involve the kids lying, that say, let's have an identity that's associated with play and recreation and is not going to track every move that you make, and then an identity for more serious things like school and interacting with family, et cetera. So it definitely seems like an issue that we need to confront. So, we've got 2 minutes left in the panel. If you watch any of my OODA casts, you know that I'm an avid reader and I always go straight for the book recommendations. So I'm going to ask, non-cybersecurity, what's one book that you would recommend that the audience read? Stephen, why don't you go first?
Oh, I'll have to think about that one for a minute.
Okay. Let's jump to Masha, because I just made you answer this on the OODA cast last week.
Yeah. My favorite leadership development, mentor development book that I finished not too long ago, it's called Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. She's amazing. If you don't have time to read the book, watch her TED Talk. She has some podcasts, but it's an amazing, amazing reflection around how to lean into vulnerability as a source of strength for leadership. It's just incredible work in the space.
Awesome. I got a feeling Bryson just went for a prop. So here he comes back. Here it comes. Here it comes. Here's the reveal.
Yeah, so I have 2 books that I'm reading that I recommend. One is The Lord of the Light, which is a fictional understanding of human psychology. And then the other is Escape from Freedom, which talks about the human psychology and why we are prone to authoritarianism.
Excellent. Check those out. Stephen, anything come to mind?
Yes. I'm rereading the Isaac Asimov series on Foundation. And the reason I'm doing that is that Apple announced that they're going to do a high quality rendition of that entire series. Isaac Asimov wrote these books back in the 1960s. And I would encourage everyone to read them, because all the topics that we're talking about are illustrated in these books, even though he didn't know at the time that there would be cell phones and things of that kind. It's just amazing to see his insight. And so I would encourage that book as a non-cyber book that's really, really helpful.
Excellent. Yeah, I see that one introduced over and over again in interviews as well. So it's obviously had an impact on this generation of technologists, as has Player of Games, which was actually recommended to me by Masha's husband, Rob, years ago, which addresses some of these same issues in the culture series. So we are at 2:15. I know we're going to make an extra special effort to stay on time with all these panels. Thank you very much to the 3 of you for participating. Very insightful. And thanks for allowing me to engage in my version of shock and awe with the question format. As you can tell, the panelists were not given any questions in advance. I like them to think on their feet. And they all did an excellent job of providing some very thoughtful responses. So with that, thank you. And Bob, I'll turn it over to you for the next panel.
Thanks for listening to this OODA Loop production. For the latest analysis on cybersecurity, technology, and global risks, please visit www.oodaloop.com.